In the quiet town of Ogwashi, in southwestern Nigeria, Mobolaji sat by the window, staring out at the setting sun. Her heart had been broken by Taiwo, a man she once believed was the love of her life. They had been inseparable since childhood, and Mobolaji had thought nothing could come between them. But Taiwo had changed. He became distant and cold, eventually leaving her without a word, leaving behind only a letter that read, "I can no longer love you as I should." Devastated, Mobolaji made the difficult decision to leave the village and seek a fresh start in the city. Lagos, the heartbeat of Nigeria, seemed like the perfect escape. She packed her things, wiped her tears, and headed to the bustling city, hoping it would heal her broken heart. On her way, she crossed paths with an old woman by the side of the road. The woman, Ugochi, had a strange aura about her, her skin weathered but her eyes sharp, as though she could peer into Mobolaji's soul. Ugochi offered her a pair of stunning sandals, beautifully adorned in gold and intricate beads. "Take these, my child. They will change the course of your life," Ugochi said, her voice smooth and deep. "Wear them and you will walk into new opportunities. But beware, for their power comes with a price." Mobolaji, still mourning Taiwo's loss, reluctantly accepted the sandals. She thought nothing of it at first. Little did she know, these sandals would change everything. Mobolaji found herself in Lagos a few days later, the city's energy buzzing all around her. She found a small apartment and quickly settled into her new routine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed since she put on the sandals. At work, she suddenly began receiving attention from her colleagues, especially the men. Their glances lingered longer. Their compliments grew more frequent, and Mobolaji couldn't help but feel a sense of power. She had always been a beautiful woman, but this was different. She felt as though the sandals had given her an edge, a confidence that wasn't there before. One evening, as she walked through the crowded streets of Victoria Island, heads turned. Men looked at her as if she were an entirely new person. Mobolaji felt eyes on her at every corner, some filled with admiration, others with desire. She smiled, enjoying the attention, but a gnawing sense of unease lingered in her chest. Why had her life turned so quickly? Why did she feel so different? Several weeks passed, and Mobolaji's life seemed to be moving forward. She was promoted at work, and her social life flourished. Yet, the image of Taiwo lingered in her mind. Despite her newfound confidence, she still felt an emptiness, like something was missing. She could not erase the memory of the man who had once meant everything to her. One evening, as she prepared for a night out, she glanced at her phone and saw a message. It was from Taiwo. "I'm sorry, Mobolaji. I never meant to hurt you. I've been thinking about us, about what we could have been. Can we meet?" The message rattled her. Part of her was angry, and another part of her longed to hear his voice again. She hesitated before replying. Despite the months that had passed, she was unsure if she was ready to face him, especially given the strange changes she had experienced since wearing the sandals. With a deep breath, she replied, "Okay, let's meet." Mobolaji agreed to meet Taiwo at a quiet cafe in the heart of Lagos. As soon as she stepped inside, her heart raced. There he was, looking as handsome as ever, though there was a sad weight in his eyes. Taiwo stood up as she approached, and the tension in the air was thick. "Mobolaji, Taiwo began, but she cut him off. "Why, Taiwo? Why did you leave me like that? Her voice trembled, with a mix of anger and hurt. Taiwo looked down, guilt washing over him. I wasn't myself, Mobolaji. I was confused. I was scared of what we were becoming. I didn't know how to handle it, but I've thought about you every day since. Mobolaji's heart fluttered. She wanted to believe him, to feel the warmth of their old connection. But something inside her was different. She could feel the sandals tightening around her feet, as if they were urging her to stay calm, to not let her emotions control her. As she looked into Taiwo's eyes, she realized something. The anger that had once consumed her was gone. There was only a strange sense of control, a sense that she didn't need Taiwo to complete her anymore. The shoes had changed her. She had changed. The days following her meeting with Taiwo were unsettling. While she was glad to have closure, she couldn't shake the growing influence the Sandals seemed to have over her. Mobolaji noticed that her interactions with people felt different, less genuine, more strategic. She was no longer driven by emotions, but by the power of control. At work, she began to rise even higher, her decisions sharp and calculated. Her boss, Chiki, took notice of her newfound assertiveness and began giving her more responsibilities. The men around her seemed to fall at her feet, all eager to be in her presence. She didn't even try anymore. It just happened. But with the attention came jealousy. Her colleague, Ngozi, who had always been friendly, began to distance herself. The resentment was palpable, and soon a rift formed between them. Mobolaji didn't care at first. Why should she? She was finally getting everything she had ever wanted. But deep down, she began to wonder, had the Sandals really changed her? Or had they just revealed a side of her she never knew existed? Mobolaji found herself at another event, surrounded by admirers and flashing lights. She had become the center of attention wherever she went, the woman everyone seemed to want. But it wasn't just the men who noticed her. Chiki, her boss, looked at her with admiration that seemed to border on obsession. Mobolaji, you're destined for greatness, Chik said one evening after a meeting. You have power in you. I see it in everything you do. Her heart skipped a beat. Chike was attractive, ambitious, and kind. There was a chemistry between them that she could no longer ignore. He leaned closer, his breath warm on her ear. You deserve more than just a promotion, Mobolaji. You deserve everything. His words hung in the air like a sweet poison. She knew what was happening. The shoes were pushing her toward him, toward power, toward something darker than she could control. One night, as she looked in the mirror, Mobolaji saw something in her reflection she hadn't noticed before. Her eyes were different. There was a coldness in them, a sharp edge she hadn't known existed. Her heart raced as she traced the gold stitching on the sandals. That was when she heard it. Whispers. Faint at first, but growing louder. The voice of Ugochi, the old woman, echoed in her mind. You are playing with forces you cannot control, Mobolaji. The shoes are not just a gift. They are a curse. You will destroy everything you love. The words sent a chill through her spine. But instead of fear, Mobolaji felt excitement. The power was intoxicating, and she was unwilling to let it go. The shoes had given her everything she had ever wanted. Was she really ready to abandon them? Late that night, as Mobolaji lay in bed, a wave of guilt washed over her. She thought about her friends, her family, and the person she used to be. The woman who was kind, compassionate, and free from the hunger for control. She wondered if the shoes were the reason she had changed so drastically, if they were the ones manipulating her emotions and desires. She needed to know the truth. She needed to find Ugochi. The next morning, Mobolaji couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had heard Ugochi's warning clearly in her mind. The voice of the old woman echoed with an urgency she hadn't noticed before. She needed answers. Answers that the shoes and the power they gave her were not providing. Without thinking, Mobolaji left her apartment and made her way back to the outskirts of Lagos, where she had first met Ugochi. The road was long, the air heavy with the scent of the city's dust and exhaust fumes. As she arrived at the edge of the village, she saw the familiar figure of the old woman sitting beneath the shade of a tree. Her eyes locked with Mobolaji's the moment she approached. "You've come," Ugochi said, as if she had been expecting her. "You feel it now, don't you? The pull, the power. You're no longer just Mobolaji, the girl from Ogwashi. You're something more." Mobolaji stood still, her heart pounding. "What have I become?" she whispered. Ugochi smiled softly, shaking her head. "You were always meant for greatness, child. But greatness does not come without sacrifice. You wear the shoes, but they are not a gift. They are a test. You must decide which side you walk on." Ugochi's words filled the air with an uncomfortable truth. Mobolaji had already felt the change within herself. The ambition, the power, the control over people. It had all come so easily. She had become someone she didn't fully recognize. But the price of all this was becoming clearer. "You see," Ugochi continued, her voice now stern. "The shoes were made from the heart of a broken spirit. They feed on your desire for control, your fear of loss, and your hunger for more. But as they grow stronger, so too does the darkness within you. You will lose everything you hold dear unless you make a choice: power or peace." Mobolaji could feel her pulse racing. What would she choose? She had already tasted power. Was it worth losing everything to keep it? What about Taiwo? What about her friends? Her family? Had she already begun to destroy the people she loved? I want to be free of this," Mobolaji said, almost pleading. "How do I break the curse?" Ugochi's eyes softened. "The shoes must be returned to the river where they were first created. Only then will you be free of their hold." With a newfound resolve, Mobolaji set out for the river, the weight of the shoes on her feet, now a constant reminder of the curse she carried. She couldn't let the power of the shoes consume her any longer. The journey back to the river was long and arduous, but every step felt like a step toward reclaiming herself. Along the way, Mobolaji began to notice the subtle shifts in her interactions with people. Her co-workers, once drawn to her, now began to distance themselves. They didn't know what had changed in her, but it was becoming clear that something had shifted. She no longer felt the thrill of the attention she once craved. Instead, she felt empty, isolated in a way she hadn't before. When she finally arrived at the river, the water seemed unusually still. It was as though it was waiting for her. She took a deep breath, stepping into the cool water, and for the first time in months, the sandals felt heavy and cold against her skin. As she stood by the riverbank, Mobolaji stared at the sandals. She wanted to throw them into the water, to be rid of them once and for all. But something stopped her. A voice, soft and tempting, whispered in her ear, "You can't let go now, Mobolaji. Look at everything you've gained. Look at the power, the respect, the success. You've come so far. Are you willing to throw it all away? The voice was seductive, its words soothing and reassuring. For a moment, Mobolaji hesitated. Could she really go back to the life she had before? Would she be willing to give up everything for peace? The temptation to keep the shoes was stronger than ever, but she had already seen the destruction they caused. She had seen how they had turned her into someone she didn't recognize. I'm not afraid anymore, she whispered to herself, her hands shaking as she held the sandals over the water. She closed her eyes and with one final breath, released them into the river. The moment the sandals hit the water, Mobolaji felt an overwhelming sense of release. It was as though a heavy burden had been lifted from her chest. The constant ache, the grip the shoes had held on her heart, was finally gone. The silence that followed was profound. The power, the temptation, the dark energy. It was all gone. But even as she felt the weight lift from her soul, Mobolaji couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. She had broken the curse, yes, but had she lost too much in the process? As she made her way back to the village, her thoughts were a whirlwind. The streets of Lagos, the admiration of others, the sense of being in control, all of it felt distant now. She had let it go, and yet something inside her still longed for it. Was it possible to be content with peace? Was she strong enough to walk away from the life she had known? When Mobolaji returned to her apartment, she found that things had changed. People who had once sought her out now seemed indifferent, like they had moved on. She checked her phone and saw messages from her family and old friends, but they were distant. Her relationship with her colleagues had soured too, and even Taiwo had stopped calling. For a moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. The power she had once craved had come at the cost of her relationships, her connections with the people who truly mattered. Was the curse the real problem? Or had she lost herself in the pursuit of something that wasn't meant for her? As the days passed, Mobolaji reached out to the people she had pushed away. Her friends, her family, and even Taiwo. The road to reconciliation wasn't easy, but she was determined. She had made mistakes, and now it was time to make things right. One evening, as she sat with her parents, her mother looked at her with tears in her eyes. Mobolaji, we saw what you were becoming. We saw how the world had changed you. But now, I see you again. The daughter I knew. You've returned to us, and that's all that matters. Taiwo too came to visit. The connection between them had been strained, but Mobolaji knew that the path forward wasn't through the shoes, the power, or the attention. It was through honesty, humility, and love. As time passed, Mobolaji found peace. She no longer sought validation through the eyes of others. The power the shoes had once promised was no longer important. What mattered was her relationships, her personal growth, and the choices she had made to reclaim her life. The sandals were gone, but Mobolaji had gained something far more valuable. Freedom. Freedom from the curse, freedom from the lies, and freedom to be her true self. In the end, Mobolaji learned that true power didn't come from control or influence. It came from living with integrity, with love, and with the courage to face the consequences of one's actions. Mobolaji's life, now simpler and more peaceful, became a source of inspiration to those around her. She became a mentor to young women in the city, teaching them not just how to succeed in life, but how to avoid the pitfalls of ambition and the dangerous lure of superficial power. She found joy in the little things, time spent with family, moments of solitude, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had found her true self. Mobolaji's story became one that was told not for its tragedy, but for its triumph over temptation. She was a living reminder that the greatest power lies not in taking control of others, but in mastering one's own desires. And as the years passed, she looked back at the girl who once wore the sandals, so lost, so driven by fear, and she smiled, knowing she had finally found the peace she had been searching for. It had been a year since Mobolaji had broken the curse of the sandals, and though life had returned to some semblance of peace, something deep within her stirred uneasily. That night, as she slept in her quiet apartment, a dream plagued her. She found herself standing at the edge of a dark river, much like the one where she had cast away the shoes. The water was still, the moon reflecting an eerie glow on its surface. As she reached to dip her fingers into the water, she saw something. The shoes, floating just beneath the surface. "No," Mobolaja cried, trying to pull them from the water, but they slipped further away. "They're coming back for me," she whispered. "I've done everything to rid myself of them." When she awoke in a cold sweat, she felt a chill in her bones. Had the curse returned? Or was this just her mind, unsettled from the choices she had made? Mobolaji couldn't shake the dread that had settled in her chest. The following morning, as Mobolaji tried to go about her day, she received an unexpected knock on her door. Standing on her doorstep was Taiwo. He looked different, older, but there was something in his eyes, a mixture of guilt and concern. "I've been hearing things, Mobolaji," Taiwo began, his voice softer than it had ever been. "I didn't want to believe it, but I've seen the sandals again." Mobolaji froze. "What are you talking about?" Her mind raced back to the dream, and a sense of dread washed over her. "People are talking," Taiwo continued. "They say that since you wore the shoes, things have changed, that power you gained. It's not gone, Mobolaji. The balance was never restored. You broke something in yourself, in us, and I think it's come back for you." His words were chilling, but Mobolaji shook her head. "No, Taiwo. I threw them away. I returned them to the river. They are gone. I have moved on. I've learned to live without them." Taiwo looked at her with sadness in his eyes. "I wish that were true, but something is stirring again. I'm worried for you, Mobolaji. You've changed more than you realize, and I think the past is catching up." Later that day, Mobolaji couldn't shake Taiwo's words. She went to the place where she had cast the sandals into the river, hoping to find some sense of peace. As she stood there, looking at the calm waters, she saw it again. The faint glimmer of something beneath the surface. There in the water were the sandals. "They're back," she whispered, her voice trembling. The river, which had once brought her relief, now felt like a prison. "Why haven't you let go?" she asked aloud. She felt a sudden weight on her heart. She thought she had freed herself, but now the curse seemed to be returning stronger than ever. The voice of Ugochi, the old woman who had first given her the sandals, echoed in her mind. "You can never escape the past unless you fully confront it. You have not finished what was started, Mobolaji." Mobolaji stood at the riverbank for what felt like hours, contemplating. She had to confront her past once more, but this time, it wouldn't be through power or fear. It would be through accepting herself and the mistakes she had made. She had let the shoes define her, let them mold her actions and desires. But now she realized that true freedom could only come from taking responsibility for the path she had chosen. With renewed resolve, Mobolaji took a step into the river. She bent down and carefully retrieved the sandals, this time holding them not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of her own weakness. "I won't let you control me anymore," she muttered, her hands trembling slightly as she held the shoes in the water. "I choose to let go, for good this time." As the sandals began to dissolve in the water, Mobolaji felt a sense of relief she had never known. The curse, once powerful, was finally fading away for good. The following weeks were the hardest of Mobolaji's life. Though she had freed herself from the sandals, she realized that the damage they had caused in her relationships was not easily repaired. Her friendships, her career, and her connection with Taiwo were all affected by the choices she had made while under the shoe's influence. Mobolaji tried to rebuild what she had lost, reaching out to her friends and family, asking for forgiveness. But the road to healing was long, and not everyone was willing to forgive her. Some had already moved on, and others still held onto the bitterness of the past. Taiwo too seemed distant, unsure whether to fully trust her again. But Mobolaji was determined. "I have to prove to myself that I am more than the woman who wore those shoes. I will rebuild from the ground up," she promised herself. Mobolaji started working on herself. She took up journaling, finding a way to express her thoughts and emotions in a way she never had before. She began to reconnect with the things that once brought her joy: painting, helping others, and even cooking. Slowly, she began to rediscover the person she had been before the shoes, the person she was always meant to be. One evening, as she sat with Taiwo, they spoke openly about the past. It was an awkward conversation at first, but the more they talked, the more Mobolaji realized that their relationship had been built on illusions. They had once loved each other, but they had never truly known each other. They had been lost in their own insecurities and needs. "I'm sorry, Mobolaji," Taiwo said quietly. "I was scared too. I didn't know how to face you. I didn't know how to be the man you needed." Mobolaji nodded. "I was scared too, Taiwo, but I'm not scared anymore. I've learned that love doesn't come from control or power. It comes from respect, and I've learned to respect myself." The healing between Mobolaji and Taiwo wasn't immediate, but in time, they began to rebuild their friendship. They both realized that they couldn't go back to what they once had, but they could move forward as better versions of themselves. Mobolaji's family also began to heal. They saw the changes in her, and though cautious at first, they began to trust her again. The power of forgiveness, both from others and from herself, became the foundation of her recovery. Mobolaji knew that she would never forget the lessons learned from her time with the Sandals, the power they held over her, the manipulation they fostered, and the price she had paid for seeking control over her life. But she also learned the most important lesson. True freedom comes not from external power, but from within. As she stood in front of the mirror one last time, she saw the woman she had become, strong, wise, and at peace with her past. She had broken free from the curse, and now she was free to live her life, not as someone else's creation, but as herself. It had been months since Mobolaji had rid herself of the corset shoes. She had worked hard to rebuild her life, her relationships, her career, and her sense of self. The echoes of the past had faded, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. However, the calm was only temporary. One afternoon, Mobolaji received a letter in the mail. The envelope was old and worn, its edges frayed as if it had been through some dark journey. She tore it open, and inside was a letter from Ugochi, the mysterious woman who had given her the sandals all those months ago. The letter read, "The curse you think you've escaped is not so easily broken. You can't outrun your past. It always finds its way back." The words sent a chill down Mobolaji's spine. She knew that Ugochi's words weren't idle threats. The woman had always known more than she let on, and now it seemed like Mobolaji's past was catching up to her. Had she truly escaped the power of the shoes? Or was something worse lurking just out of sight, waiting to claim her once again? The letter was only the beginning. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. Mobolaji would walk down the street, only to feel as if eyes were watching her from the shadows. She'd hear whispers that were almost too faint to catch, but loud enough to make her heart race. And most unsettling of all, she began to notice people in her life changing. People she once trusted, now acting distant and cold, as if they could sense something she couldn't. Her relationship with Taiwo, though improved, started to shift again. He was becoming more withdrawn, his eyes often clouded with a quiet worry that Mobolaji couldn't understand. He began to pull away, making excuses and avoiding her calls. "Taiwo, what's going on?" Mobolaji confronted him one evening. "You're distant again. You've been acting strange." Taiwo avoided her gaze, his jaw tight. "Mobolaji, I don't know what's happening, but ever since you threw the shoes away, things haven't been the same. I can't explain it, but I feel like something is still there. Something we can't escape." A wave of fear rushed over Mobolaji. She felt the weight of the curse return. The peace she had fought so hard for seemed to be slipping away from her once again. Could it be that Ugochi's words were true? Had the curse never really left? Desperate for answers, Mobolaji sought out Ugochi once again. This time, she didn't wait for the old woman to come to her. She knew that Ugochi held the key to what was happening to her, and Mobolaji was determined to end the cycle once and for all. She made her way back to the outskirts of Lagos, to the same place where she had first met Ugochi. The air was thick with anticipation as Mobolaji stood before the woman who was sitting on the same old wooden stool. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Mobolaji asked, her voice steady but filled with underlying anger. "You knew that getting rid of the shoes wouldn't be the end of it. You knew I couldn't escape." Ugochi looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and regret. "The shoes were only a part of it, Mobolaji. They fed off your fear, your need for control. But what you didn't understand is that the real curse is not in the shoes. It's in the choices we make when we are given power, how we choose to wield it, and what we're willing to sacrifice to keep it." Mobolaji's heart raced as the pieces started to come together. "So what now? What am I supposed to do? How do I break free from this?" Ugochi stood up slowly and walked toward Mobolaji. "You already have the answer. The curse will always be a part of you, but you have the power to control it. You've learned that power doesn't come from control over others. It comes from within, from understanding yourself, from choosing peace over fear. That is the only way to break the cycle once and for all. Ugochi's words rang in Mobolaji's ears as she walked away from their meeting. She had always believed that the curse had been something external, something she could throw away or destroy. But now she realized that the curse had always been about her, her choices, her desires, and her own sense of power. As she returned to her apartment, Mobolaji sat down and closed her eyes. She thought about everything she had lost, the relationships, the trust, the self-respect she had once had. But now, she saw the bigger picture. The sandals, the power they gave her. It had all been a test, and she had failed it. Until now, Taiwo's face flashed in her mind. She needed to fix what she had broken with him, to rebuild what they had lost. Not because of power, but because of love and understanding. She couldn't keep running from her past. She had to face it, fully and completely. The next morning, Mobolaji took a long walk to the place where she had once cast away the sandals. The river was still there, calm and serene, just as it had been before. But this time, Mobolaji didn't see the sandals. They were gone. She smiled softly, knowing that this was her true victory. The curse was no longer about the shoes. It was about her ability to live without them, without the power they had given her, and she would live the rest of her life free of that influence, choosing love and peace over fear and control. With the lessons learned from her past, Mobolaji began to rebuild her life, not just in terms of career, but with the relationships that truly mattered. Taiwo, though still hesitant at times, gradually came back into her life. He too had learned from their past mistakes. Together, they began to build a foundation that was rooted in mutual respect, honesty, and healing. Mobolaji also reconnected with her friends and family, asking for their forgiveness and slowly earning back their trust. It wasn't easy, but she was no longer the woman she had been before. She had grown, and the lessons of the curse had shaped her into someone stronger. Mobolaji found new purpose in mentoring young women in her community. She spoke openly about her journey, sharing the lessons she had learned about power, self-worth, and the importance of making choices that align with one's true self. Her story became an inspiration, and she began to use her experience to help others avoid the pitfalls of ambition and the destructive lure of external validation. Years passed, and Mobolaji's life continued to evolve. She and Taiwo grew closer, not as two people driven by power and fear, but as two individuals who respected each other's journeys. They built a future together, one founded on love, communication, and the shared understanding that they had both come a long way. Mobolaji no longer needed validation from the outside world. She had learned to find peace within herself. On a quiet evening, as Mobolaji sat by the river, once more, she looked at the reflection of the stars on the water. The sandals, the curse, and the power, all of it seemed like a distant memory. She had faced her fears, accepted her flaws, and found the true strength that lay within her. The river whispered softly, as if in agreement. Mobolaji had learned that the greatest power lies not in controlling the world around us, but in accepting ourselves and our past and choosing to move forward with grace.